Welcome back to Trash Talk with Trista, the podcast where we dig into big conversations shaping recycling, waste, and sustainability here in Minnesota and beyond. Today's episode is all about the future, where the waste industry is headed, and innovation changing the way we think about materials and energy, and what communities should be preparing for in the years ahead. Joining me today is Jennefer Klennert. Jennefer leads a diverse team of solid waste experts dedicated to advancing innovation and driving meaningful change in solid waste programs. She brings a unique integrated approach that blends policy development, program design, cross-sector collaboration, and change management to create practical, real-world solutions to complex solid waste challenges. Jennefer, welcome to Trash Talk with Trista.
Thank you, Trista. So excited to be here.
We are really happy to have you. Before we jump into the hard questions, I think one of the unique things about you is that you not only have a career in waste, you have had a whole lifetime in waste. So just give us a little snippet on how long you've been in this industry.
Yeah, so I always start the intro with I've been doing this since I was 7, and I love to say that. So my family owned a trash business.
Yeah.
And so it's in my blood. It's always been in my blood. And so I might have been trash talking before you, Trista, but
for sure
you've definitely got a handle on it now as well. So yeah, 30 plus years in the industry and absolutely love it.
When you're called to do the family business, I'm sure things have changed drastically.
A lot.
And very different over the years, but that you have been on this journey all along and then made it a career.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. And now you're working for HDR.
Correct.
And why don't you tell us who HDR is?
Yep. HDR is an architecture and engineering firm. And so we are a team of scientists, architects, engineers, and planners. And we love to do solid waste projects. And so we take them all the way from the beginning in planning to putting together the infrastructure and then building it as well. And so really unique background. We also have a team of data scientists and strategic communications people.
Wow.
So we like to be able to talk in a way that is understandable to people about the industry that we're in.
Because waste is very technical.
It is very technical.
I mean, people think of garbage and they just put their garbage in a magic can.
Yes.
And then the magic can goes away and what happens to it is magic. But that's really what you all do is what happens next.
Correct.
Right?
And I wish people wanted, I think people love trash and everyone can relate to it.
Right.
So we just need to make it more relatable so that they can understand what the heck we're doing.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And that there's value.
Exactly.
There's value in not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it, right? Yeah.
Right.
So tell me, from your perspective in HDR, what feels most different since you've been doing this since you were 7 about the industry today compared to even 5 years ago?
Yeah. So really, I think, one of the big things is a renewed focus on safety.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people don't quite recognize is that solid waste and recycling is the number 4 most dangerous industry. And I'm actually the president of the Minnesota, North Dakota chapter of SWANA, Solid Waste Association in North America. Yeah. And we're trying to get out of that. We've been religiously like in the top 10. Yeah. And so we just want to get out of it. There's renewed focus on safety, whether it's fire detection systems, when you think about lithium ion batteries, there's cameras that are in the cabs to help protect the drivers, to make sure that there's not unsafe behaviors happening. And there's a lot of change going on with the equipment as well. So,
Yeah, and I think it's really important to just linger a little bit on the safety issue, and especially at Ramsey Washington Recycling and Energy. We're a very large facility, so to speak, in volumes, but our footprint isn't that large. Right. And so we really have to take into account the safety when there are big trucks, right? And all the mechanical sortation equipment. Yeah. And these are huge industrial machines that are pulverizing trash into small pieces. Our last podcast was actually on the infectious waste bill.
Oh my.
Another issue, as you are familiar with as well, and about worker safety there too. And what's in the trash is dangerous in addition to all the equipment.
So I'd like to say too, one of the things that I think we forget about is that this is really truly like a bottom-up industry where 80 to 90% of our workforce are, the men and women that are out doing exactly what you said, your union workers that are at the plant, all the way to the, men and women that are driving those trucks.
Yes.
And we need to really focus on making sure that they go home to their families safe every day. And it's everything from fires to your point about infectious waste, and just making sure that their jobs are not easier, but that they're every day able to go home to their families in the same condition they showed up in the morning.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those fires
Yeah.
because they are
Yeah.
huge, and you've seen whole
Yes.
plants burn down
Yeah,
across
absolutely.
the country.
And
I know.
even here locally.
Right. And what causes those fires?
Yeah. So it's batteries.
Yeah.
It's lithium ion batteries, it's vapes, it's materials that are going into the trash and even worse into the recycling.
Yes.
And they are very flammable. Once they get manipulated, they get bent. There's a reason they say don't reach for your phone when it drops in the airplane, in between your seats. And so it's the same thing. Like, we want to make sure that those are put in the right space.
Yeah.
We're really lucky here in Minnesota. We have a very robust infrastructure where those can be taken to a Ramsey County facility, a Washington County facility, or anywhere else to be, managed properly.
Yeah.
But we're seeing, because they are ending up in the trash, we're seeing a renewed focus on technology and making sure that, those fires are detected early if they do happen. And really, it's, we worry about the infrastructure, but even more, we worry about the worker safety.
Yeah. And I think, just on those batteries, like people don't even realize how many batteries are in things. So if it's a rechargeable battery, please don't put it in the garbage. Because that's the lithium ion batteries. But they're in everything, right? They're even in children's sneakers. If your kiddo's running and their shoes are lighting up, those are batteries, which, by the way, could catch fire. So how about that? Maybe we shouldn't put them on our kiddos.
Exactly. But I mean, we just need to continue to think. I think, think about everything that you throw away. Is this something that could potentially hurt someone?
Right.
I know you talked about medical waste.
Yes.
I'm sure you talked about needles.
Yes.
Our men and women are coming into contact with these materials, and we need to just be thoughtful about what we're placing in the trash.
And we've seen even trucks catch fire. It's not just the facility. We've seen trucks have to dump their load
in the middle of the street or a parking
on
lot.
Grand Avenue.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. And that's why what happens is things inside the trash will catch fire.
Correct.
And then we have to do that for safety. So it's really important. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm glad we're talking worker safety.
Yep.
As we think about educating the community and thinking about how people are thinking about waste, there's a lot of rhetoric, right?
Yes.
There's lots of things from zero waste is the only way to, more recycling, to the people who don't believe any of it's real,
Absolutely.
right? It's a unicorn, right? And so how are you seeing the shifts in community and how they're thinking about recycling, organics, landfills, waste to energy? There's a lot of conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so much to unpack there.
There really
and
is.
You kind of briefly started, but there's definitely an increased focus on waste diversion and what we call zero waste. And however you define it, it's about doing more with less. Basically, we're seeing conversions to weekly recycling where they're increasing people's capacity to recycle. We're also seeing things like the food scrap pickup program that Ramsey, Washington is offering, and other counties obviously do as well. And I want to mention, the newest star that's out there is reuse.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have been doing reuse for a long time, but I think, we're going to see more infrastructure coming around that.
Yeah.
That'll be really integral to helping to change things. As far as, other shifts, we are, as HDR and myself, we're seeing a renewed interest in waste to energy.
Yes.
And that's happening in the U.S. and Canada. We're seeing a lot of studies around waste to energy, green fields potentially happening. It's not just the U.S., it's in North America, it's in Canada as well. And there's also some excitement. We're not going to get too dry here, but, there was just a release, and I know a press release that R&E did around the potential for, waste to energy to treat PFAS and destroy PFAS. Yes. And I think it's really important that we understand that there's things that our technologies can do that we don't even know right now. Finally, we're seeing a lot of additional investments in collections technology.
Yeah.
And so stuff to make, people safer, to detect contamination actually going into the trucks. It's not just about batteries. It's about contamination and recycling. We're seeing a renewed interest in what we call waste characterizations. And for people who don't know, trash and recycling, it's when you literally get to dig through trash and figure out what the heck is in it and what you're going to do with it. Yeah. And so those are helping us to understand better what kind of outcomes we can have.
Right.
And then finally, the other thing that we're seeing is a lot of renewed interest in zero emission technology.
Okay.
Because think about the trucks that Ramsey,
Yeah.
Washington has. Think about the garbage and recycling trucks. We're kind of in the messy middle, but we're seeing, CNG is happening right now.
What's CNG?
That is compressed natural gas.
There you go.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's one way that we're fueling the trucks instead of diesel.
Right.
Because diesel has a lot of particulate matter.
Yes,
so
it
we're
does.
seeing that. We're seeing some electrification and maybe even some hydrogen down the road.
Yay.
So for anybody who, thinks trash is just trash, like we're excited about all of these things
Well, there's
happening.
nothing but potential, right? Because it's
Correct.
wasted. And I think what's really important as people think about what's in trash, what is it there, what could I have avoided putting in the trash in the first
Absolutely.
place? How do I reuse something, whether it's containers? I mean, you and I are about the same age. And there was a time when, it wasn't necessarily Tupperware. Everything was called Tupperware. But it might have been the
Exactly.
Cool Whip
Yes.
container, right? The butter dish.
Yep.
We reuse that for leftovers forever, right?
Absolutely.
Until it couldn't be, it
Right.
got melted somewhere along the line, right before we even disposed in the recycling. And so to think about how we're reusing and how we're even making purchases, when we think about, and I love that you mentioned reuse in particular. One of the biggest problems, because we do those waste characterizations, is textiles.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's all the
Absolutely.
fabric, the clothes, and lots of people donate. Right. I am an avid thrifter and only wear thrifted clothing, but there's still more than can
There
be
is.
sold. And so
Yeah.
what do we do with
Yep.
those textiles?
Yeah,
right?
and there's fast fashion,
Yes.
which is basically stuff that's intended to be worn just a couple times,
Right.
and then it rips, tears. It isn't any good. It can't be reused.
Right.
And so I think we really need to think thoughtfully all the way from the beginning,
Yes.
which is where we make that decision. I was thinking it through. It's like, do we not consume?
Right.
Do we just not buy that in the first place?
Right.
Do we really need it? Can we borrow it?
Right.
Does someone else have it? The buy nothing groups that you see
Yes.
online, a lot of times people are borrowing things
Yes.
to each other. If we can't, if we have to buy it, can we reuse it?
Right.
You talked about the Cool Whip containers, which I think are underrated. Everybody loves the Cool Whip containers, but we're all good. And then, once you get past that whole do we reuse, it's like, okay, can I recycle it?
Right.
And then beyond that, it goes in the trash. The one thing that kind of brings up is, Minnesota is in the process of doing what they're calling a needs analysis around extended producer responsibility. And so that's really where the state is essentially asking the producers to pay more towards recycling and management of their materials end of life.
Yeah.
And so that's really something that's going to be changing what our bottles look like, what our cans
Right.
look like, what our packaging looks like in the future here in Minnesota. And so
It's huge.
I'm super excited about
Yeah.
that. And I'm also excited that it not only talks about the containers and the bottles, not only recycling, it also looks at reuse.
Awesome.
So that's a really good thing.
I mean, I do think, we've seen all across the world. You and I have traveled around
Yeah,
the world together, looking at
absolutely.
other people's garbage,
trash, yeah,
at our own
exactly.
garbage, and really thinking about how we can do things different. And
Right.
Europe, for instance, uses glass containers and
Yes.
almost no single-use plastics.
Yeah.
Right. Now the trade-off is it's heavier
Right.
shipment volumes, those kinds of things.
Right.
But glass can be recycled
Right,
forever.
Right. And we have
without-
local markets here,
Right.
which is really exciting.
It really
too.
is. And so sometimes what's old is new again.
Right. Bring it all back.
Right. And maybe we can do some lessons, and you're right. It is about, do we need it in the first place? Do we
Right.
need, our culture is one of overconsumption.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we all have to, live on the earth only and, sew our own clothing.
Right.
But there is a way that even in our busy corporate lives that we can just consume a whole
Right.
lot less, or maybe that purchase you wait until it's a higher quality of
Right.
fashion so that it can last longer.
Yeah,
right?
you think about the Patagonias and others of the world where
Right.
they, are, repairing and those kind of
Right.
things. So you can speak with your dollars as,
Right.
in addition to understanding how that end of
Yeah.
life is going to happen. So
less is more.
it is.
It's
It
less is
is,
more,
absolutely.
and at the end, And let's talk a little bit about waste to energy, because I think this is an area, especially here in Minnesota, has a lot of misinformation about
100%.
what it is, what it does and doesn't do in the environment. So let's dig into it a little.
Yeah, for sure. So HDR has been involved in waste to energy, since the 70s, basically. Yeah. And so, we're a strong electrical firm, so we've worked a lot with boilers and different things. Yep. So we helped, design some of the infrastructure that's here in Minnesota, that came back in the 70s and 80s. I think, one of the things is that continued education on what waste to energy is really important. I think it's really critical how we tell that story and understand it. Minnesota's supported waste to energy infrastructure since the 1980s. And we do need to refocus our efforts and energy. These are 30 to 40 year facilities. And I think sometimes we don't want them, but we're completely acceptable with building another landfill.
Right.
And so I think it's, it becomes a choice. I know there's concern about, feeding the burner and other things, but I think one thing that we're seeing with infrastructure in general, whether it's waste to energy or recycling and infrastructure, is we're seeing that we're designing them for flexibility.
Yes.
And so, I think Ramsey and Washington County, have done some really good things around partnership and regionalization. I think that there's going to be more coming, with Sherburne, Greater Minnesota, looking at other opportunities for managing waste. And as we try to get towards that, no more than 2% in the landfill, we have to have something to do with it. We need to look at this not just on like a 10 or 15-year plan, but a 30 to 40-year plan. The other thing is I think we need to think about, not just the end, which is that burning in the waste to energy, creating energy or some other byproduct, but also about pre-processing.
Yes.
And I mean, I know we're getting really technical here.
But I think that's the shift, right?
Correct.
So there was a time when we just mass burned everything, and then we took out metals after the fact, right? And there's a little debate on technology there. It had higher BTUs, right? If you did that, you had a higher quality of energy. Yeah. So it was about the energy as the outcome as opposed to the waste processing, right? And so now we're pulling out all the recyclables. We're pulling things out ahead of time.
Correct.
And what we can't recycle or can't process, then that's going to the burner.
Correct. Right? And that's really what pre-processing is, we have tried to educate our way out of this, and it's confusing.
It is.
And I, even as someone who's been in the industry forever, and I think you as well, it's hard. Recycling is hard.
Really
sometimes you get materials that are 2 or 3 different items you just don't know.
Right.
And so what pre-processing is about we want you to not buy it in the first place. We want you to reuse it and then recycle it at your home. That's obviously the best way. But if it accidentally ends up getting in the waste, pre-processing is about getting that out ahead of time and then only burning or combusting whatever is left at the end of the day.
And capturing the energy from that and destroying the PFAS because of the heat destroys PFAS. Right?
Correct. And the one other thing I want to say, is we always hear things like feed the burner and that kind of thing. And so, it hurts my heart, honestly, because we're okay with burying more and putting materials in the landfill, but it's not acceptable to make energy out of it. Right. And so, I'm probably crossing a line here or something, but it's like, I think it's important to have a robust conversation. Yes. And I would love to not consume and reuse our way out of all of this.
Same.
But we're looking at a 30, 40, 50-year horizon, and it's going to take us that long to get there.
Or longer.
Right? And, EPR and other things are going to take time.
Yes.
It's going to be a while. It's not going to just, snap your fingers and move on. So I think we've got to be open to a lot of solutions, but we also need to be flexible.
100%.
So we can't, if your material is, if Ramsey and Washington don't produce enough, are there other areas that we can get waste from and do better things with? how do you make sure that it's not going into the landfill? That's always been my goal and priority.
Well, and I think let's just emphasize why we don't want to bury it, right? I think people,
it's a forever problem.
It is a forever, and it's someone else's forever problem. If we bury it, it's out of sight, out of mind for us, but the next generation will be impacted. Yeah. And water always wins.
Exactly.
Right? We can line. There's lots of liners. There's landfill technology. Landfill operators are doing the best they can.
They absolutely
But you
are.
can only do so good when you're burying it, because water and Mother Nature always wins, right?
Yeah, and HDR, we design landfills as well. We're involved with every step in this infrastructure, whether it's recycling or education and planning. But I think it's really important to understand that waste never goes away.
Right.
And no matter how good we think technology is, in a landfill, something is going to happen eventually.
Yes.
And it becomes, with Minnesota, with our closed landfill rules, it's always a state problem. It's always our problem.
It is always our
here
problem.
in Minnesota. And so I think, thinking about how we cannot end up burying it at the end of the day is really important.
And if we think about those landfills, think of how many valuable resources
are
just buried under the ground, right? There are recyclables that never got recovered. Many counties in the state don't have the facilities, they don't have the infrastructure, and so their only option right now is to bury, unless we do something different, right? And we think about regionalization or partnerships in that way so that we can get there. And then what's left over, let's turn to energy and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, right?
And I will say, that the thing that really makes my heart happy is we're having these conversations.
Right.
And they're being talked about in an educated way, in a calm way.
Right.
We're having conversations about what the future looks like.
Right.
And I think everyone deserves a seat at the table to talk about what's important to them. But at the end of the day, we need to make educated, knowledgeable decisions.
Yeah, with
and
science.
So, absolutely. Science has to be behind it for sure.
And I think, obviously, there's a lot of feelings in this space.
And garbage
emotions.
is so personal.
Everybody
can relate to it. We all love, everybody has a story about garbage.
Right. Or good or bad.
Exactly.
Right. Something they rescued, or, I thrifted, or, the one man's trash is another's treasure. Yeah. Or the opposite of, I'm sick. My water is contaminated. I have asthma, and the particulate matter, as you mentioned, and that we're looking and tackling those real problems at the real culprit, right? And I think that's really important, and I'm so glad that you came today to have this conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
And our time flew.
Oh my gosh, we're already done.
Like, we're already here, so we'll have to have you back again.
Yeah, for
we
sure.
can go deeper on
absolutely.
What are those conversations, and maybe we'll have a conversation about those personal, emotional feelings.
I think we should
that we can then tackle with science, because I do believe that there's no problem too big that we can't solve as long as we're willing to tackle the problem and solve it. So anyway.
Thank you for letting me be passionate about trash this morning, because I love the industry. I love the people, and thank you for letting me talk about it this morning.
Of course, Trash Talk. Let's do it.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Well, thanks to listening to Trash Talk with Trista. Every conversation helps us better understand how we can reduce waste, recover resources, and build a more sustainable future together. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone. We'll see you next time with Trash Talk with Trista.